I was going to introduce Jared by saying he needs no introduction, but he said, no, why don't you just talk about yourself? And I said, okay, the reason I want to hear Jared come is, bar none, he's the most amusing person. And I really tried to think if I can identify anybody who I would listen to conveying useful information with that level of humor. So I think that's his reputation. I'm not the only person who came here just to laugh. But he's also extremely empirical. So, you know, when you're sitting around going, I wonder if this is true, or if you're near some Danish pope who describes some small little regression as being the universal law of gravity, then Jared would be the kind of person who would go, is that generalization in any way hold up? And tonight maybe he'll talk not about that, but about his title. Welcome.
Thank you. I wish I'd brought the funny presentation. I want to take us on a journey to a faraway place, Kunming, China. For those of you who have never had the opportunity to be in Kunming, China, it's right there. It sort of sits right in the trade routes between eastern China and the western parts of Burma and Bangladesh and all these. It's, for thousands of years, it's been a sort of center of trade in the Chinese world. But now it's very much a modern city. It feels a lot like Chicago, though it's about the size of LA. And it has all the trappings of a modern city, but it still has a lot of very cool features like these giant stone forests that has a monastery built on top. That's these 100-foot tall stones that you can wander about. And one of the other really interesting things is their vast collection of Apple stores. They have these Apple stores, but these are not just any Apple stores. These are imitation Apple stores. They are fake Apple stores. They look like Apple stores. The interior has been designed. They have the same signage, the same stuff, even down to the employees' T-shirts and badges. They are identical. And what's interesting about Kunming is that city alone hosts 41 imitation Apple stores. These stores are identical to the Apple stores you've probably been in every way, almost. But what's really interesting about the Apple stores is that they're not just in Kunming. In fact, they're not just in China. These imitation stores that are like Apple stores are popping up everywhere. In fact, it turns out that here in North America, there are now at least 72 imitation Apple stores. And much like the ones in Kunming, they are decorated with similar furniture, with similar signage, even down to the employees' T-shirts and badges. Except these are run by Microsoft. And Barnes & Noble has opened up a set of stores to sell their Nook that are decorated in this sort of similar fashion, as has JCPenney, who wanted to be so much like an Apple store that they went out and hired the dude who created the original Apple store and made him CEO, and asked him to make JCPenney just like Apple stores. And this is crazy. Everybody wants to be like an Apple store. And it's not just in the tech space or the clothing space. It's actually hit the liquor industry. We need audio. If we can have, please. Hello? Audio. Try it again. Let's try this again. Can we get it? No?
Operating system, pump.
I'm going to go back to, okay, there we go. Try it one more time.
What's your latest operating system, pump?
I'm going to run straight in there and grab one.
So this is Somersby.
This is it. This is what all the excitement's about. 16 pip, 32 pip.
This is the 32 pip.
Is it wireless?
Oh, yeah, look, completely wireless.
Single core, dual core.
Full of great content, easy to use.
Move towards the mouth and interface.
It works in your normal docking system.
That's docked.
That's docked, yeah.
And you've downloaded.
I've downloaded.
Yeah. One click.
Boom, you're connected.
Oh, so?
It's amazing.
Really good. And works perfectly in direct sunlight.
Summersby cider. Less apps, more apples.
So, what is it about the Apple Store mystique? I mean, is this just fashion? Is everybody just going after this? Well, I don't think so. There are some indicators that say maybe it's not. For example, last year, 2012, the Apple Store had more foot traffic, or as much foot traffic, as all of the Disney parks combined. Okay. And if we look at how well the Apple Store does, well, for baseline, we have to sort of look at the average mall store, which the way they measure success in a mall store is the amount of business it does per square foot. So the average mall store does about $341 per square foot. The Tiffany's, which has traditionally been one of the largest ones, they do $3,017 per square foot. The Apple Store comes in at $6,050 per square foot. So of course, everybody in retail wants to be like the Apple Store, because if they can increase their sales per square foot, that's really important to them. And the thing about the Apple Store is how they do this, right? It's the details, just the way they display products. They have an iPad for signage, right? That's how they now do this, because it makes sense to have that technology there. If you want to check out, there are no cashiers per se. Instead, you find the employee that's walking around with the iPod that has the adapter that lets him swipe your credit card and print you a receipt. And if you don't feel like paying with credit card, you want to pay with cash, that same individual has some magic fairy dust that makes a cash drawer appear out of plain old furniture. These are the little details of retail that nobody ever thinks about, but they thought about it. And because they thought about it, it completely changes the experience of shopping at the Apple Store. And it's those little details that are considered. Everything that is in the Apple Store is intentional. Nothing is left to chance. And I bring this up because this is what I believe design to be about. Design, in essence, is the rendering of intent. It's making a decision, one way or the other, and then acting on that decision and making it happen. And it's not just the Apple Store where we see this. We see this happening in a lot of different places. Last year, as I'm sure you've heard, Apple was involved in a lawsuit with Samsung, and eventually was awarded $1 billion. If you look at the evidence in the suit, all of the really smoking gun evidence was about intentional design. Here was one of the pieces of evidence. It's a chart that shows what the Samsung and Apple phone lines looked like. Back in 2005, 2006, Samsung's phones, they looked like Samsung phones, and Apple, of course, didn't have one yet. When they released the iPhone has a very distinctive look. And if you think about it, the Samsung phones are somewhat distinctive. After they first released, they continued along that distinctive look that was something that was their own. But then suddenly, everything changed. And the Samsung phones started to look like iPhones. That wasn't an accident, that was intentional. That was designed. And another piece, probably the most damning piece of evidence in the entire case, was this wacky 132-page QA report. Right? A QA report is what turned the jury. Now, I don't know if you've seen the report. It's available online. It's really incredible. Basically, every page of this report takes the Galaxy S1 and reports flaws. And the way the QA people found the flaws, their method, was to compare the S1 to an iPhone. And page after page after page, the recommendation was just make it work like an iPhone. 132 pages. Imagine being the QA engineer who's reading an article that was sent to him from the Wall Street Journal explaining how his report cost his company $1 billion. And he's probably thinking, wow, someone read my report. At the heart of design is intention. And it's interesting because intention can be rendered on a spectrum. And the spectrum goes from imitation to innovation. And it's a pattern that we can see over and over and over again. A few years back, Yahoo came out with a brand new homepage, very innovative for them. A few months later, AOL came out with a brand new homepage, very derivative for them. Why would AOL do that? Why would they go that way? Well, it's a choice, it turns out. You see, the imitation route is definitely cheaper, and there's no real risk to it. You take something that's working, you copy it, you make it happen. Whereas the innovation route, well, that takes a lot of experimentation. You may not succeed. You may never find the thing that really works. And it's going to cost a lot to get there. So we have this spectrum here. But what's really interesting is that as we start to talk to organizations that tend to go one direction versus the other, we noticed a pattern. The imitation-centered organizations, they tended not to really value design. Value was always this low-level thing in their organization, something that was added at the very end, sort of a veneer put onto things, seen as a commodity. Whereas the companies that focused on innovation, they had leadership that understood design. They talked about design all the time. It was highly valued. They would go out of their way to get great designers. And they saw it as something that would give them a competitive advantage. So it turns out that this spectrum is something we can choose. And what we've learned is that a business can win if they are intentionally innovative. That's what the real lesson of Apple has been for the last few years. Is that if you are intentionally innovative, you can slowly but surely kidnap a marketplace. And that's what they did. And this means that the businesses win when they value design, and more importantly, when they value designers. So it's a really great time to be a designer for those businesses. Now, it turns out that not all businesses get this. Some entire industries sort of fall off the wagon. And they don't understand what's happening to them. Newspaper industry completely didn't understand why a major chunk of their revenue, the classifieds business, went away because of a single website. A website which, by the way, is well designed. Now, there are a lot of visual designers and a lot of interaction designers that would claim otherwise. But if you ever have the opportunity to actually watch people use this site, there's a lot of thoughtful intention that went into it. Interestingly enough, this same site, it's seeing challenges on its own. Right now, for example, in the vacation rental category, they have major challengers, mostly from a site that's even better designed. And so this idea that design can overthrow a marketplace is something that people are beginning to see, people are beginning to get. And industries everywhere are really nervous about this. Take the financial services industry. They're completely up in arms by a little startup, by a dude who didn't finish college, who created this little plastic widget that he cleverly named for its shape, the square, that doesn't cost anything to make, that plugs into a phone, so they give it away for free, and then they sell the service. And this service that they sell is revolutionizing the way credit cards work. Because there used to be this stranglehold on who could and could not have credit card processing capability. And a business had to jump through mega hoops to get that. But that's no longer. Anybody can have credit card processing now. Taxi drivers, your babysitter, your Coke dealer, all of them can now process your credit cards just fine. So suddenly that's changing everything. And the entire industry is up in arms, and everybody's scrambling to come up with some alternative solution, some competitive thing. PayPal has come up with their own solution, and they've made it a triangle. The rental car industry, same sort of deal. This little upstart company that didn't exist before, wasn't in there, didn't have an inventory of cars, starts to slowly create one city at a time, and is doing something radically different. Now, we think of it as hourly rentals, and that is really important, but what is even more important is the elimination of staff. Zipcar can run with substantially less staff per vehicle than any of the other cars. There's nobody to fill out all that crazy paperwork every time you go to rent. There's nobody checking cars in and checking cars out. Even refilling the gas is something that's handled by the customer. And they just sort of eliminated all of the craziness around renting a car. Again, putting the entire industry in panic mode. For years, Hertz has been trying to come up with an equivalent service, but they can't seem to figure out how to get rid of the people who actually deal with the cars. So they have all the personnel, and they can't keep the cost down, and they can't have the inventory in all the places they want to have it. It's not working for them. Avis also gave it a try, and they finally gave up and just bought the damn company. And what happened when they bought the damn company is that they scared the hell out of the customer base. The customers are now pleading Avis to not screw up the experience of being a Zipcar. So what is it about this? Well, the thing that we've learned is that if you get this right, the payoff is huge. Absolutely huge. Let's look at the entertainment industry. A part of the entertainment industry that's a couple hundred years old that hadn't changed. Circuses. The circus world was a dying world until a little French company, came and rattled their cage. The company was started by a couple of street performers. The street performers said, let's start a circus, which was the craziest thing to say with an industry that was actually shrinking at like 20% a year. And they decided in the process of creating the circus to just change one thing. The entire success of Cirque du Soleil was based on a single design decision. And that design decision had to do with removing animals. Now, this in itself was heresy. What brought people to the circus were the elephants and the horses and the dogs jumping through fiery hoops. That's what people wanted to see. They wanted to see the lion in the cage and the bear on the ball. They wanted to see all that stuff. Remove the animals, what do you have left? But that's not how they thought about the problem. How they thought about the problem was about the benefits. Turns out the most expensive part of running a circus was the animals. It costs a lot of money to move these animals across the country, to constantly be caring for their health. They were huge insurance liabilities. And the protesters and the permits didn't make it any easier. All of that was getting harder and harder. But by removing the animals, they saved a bunch of money. So what did they do with that money? Well, they put it into better performers, and better music, and better sets, and better costumes. And it had this other effect. When you got rid of the animals, there was no reason for the little kids to go anymore. And when the little kids stopped going, you can raise your prices. What used to be a $35 ticket was now $120 to $200 a seat. And because of this, Cirque du Soleil now makes more money every evening than all of Broadway. Because of a design decision. Design. Now, years ago, Milton Glaser, who did the I Love New York and New York Magazine and a million different album covers from the 60s, he did the logo for the musical Hair and all these things. Someone asked him what he did, and he says, well, I move things around until they look right. That was the best he could do to explain what his job was. And in those days, that's basically what his job was, because in those days, design was essentially about the visual. But now, design is not really about the visual. Design is about the business. And that is a significant change. And we can see it show up in a million different ways. Let's go back to the Apple Store for a second. Let's compare how the Apple Store gets a product to a customer. So let's say how Best Buy might do that. So if you're going to buy a Samsung tablet at Best Buy, right, the way that that's going to work is you're going to go to Best Buy, you're going to hand them some cash, you're going to get a tablet. 50% of that cash goes to Best Buy. 40% goes to Samsung. The remaining 10% goes to a distributor whose job it is to get that product from Samsung's factories to Best Buy's stores. Now let's compare this to Apple. I mean, this basically works the same way everywhere, and it works the same way at Apple, with a slight variation. Apple still has a manufacturer, a distributor, and a retailer. It's just all Apple, which means that that distribution all goes to Apple. So for every dollar that you hand Best Buy, if you handed it to Apple, they would get all that money, whereas Best Buy only gets half that money. And actually, this isn't quite accurate, because you have to take into account the fact that Best Buy discounts, but Apple does not. So because Apple does not discount, they actually get a little bit more. Somehow, Apple manages to get more than 100% of the money you give them. That's brilliant. That's designed. This is not an accident. This is designed. In fact, business models are designed, and really great business models are intentionally designed to get great results. This means that design is not just about visual. It's not just about something digital. Businesses need design everywhere, which means they need designers everywhere. I've been talking a lot about Apple here, but they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. How many people here, just out of curiosity, you raise your hand, have at some point purchased an Apple product? Okay, now keep your hands up. Keep your hand up. Put your hand down if you never had to take one of those products back to the store. Okay, about half of you kept your hands up, right? Why? Because Apple products, you can put it down now. Apple products break. Okay? This is called an artisanal front plate design. Okay? It turns out that the products break. They break at about the same rate that everybody else's products break. The difference is that when you have to go back to the Apple store, you don't just talk to anybody. You talk to someone whose job title is genius. Right? How brilliant was that? To name the people you talk to geniuses. It would be cool to be a genius, right? In my house, it would have completely changed Thanksgiving. My mother says, "What do you do now?" "I'm a genius, Mom." "Oh, my son's a genius. How much does that pay?" "Minimum wage." It was a brilliant move. But I want to go back to this notion of a defective product, because there's actually something to learn from this, right? Companies have defective products. So what if we map out the customer journey of a defective product? We would have various milestones on that journey: buying a product, trying it out, returning to the store, waiting for service, getting resolution. Now let's map out the journey for a customer that has a broken product and they end up getting great service, right? Well, what does that look like? Well, it starts out, we would measure it on a scale from extreme frustration to extreme delight. And at the beginning, it turns out that they're very excited about the product, but as soon as they try it, it's broken. So now they're very frustrated. Well, they have to go back to the store. That's sort of a neutral experience, but then they have to wait at the store. It's this miserable experience. And then they get their resolution, and that itself is a good experience. So that's the journey. We mapped it out here. What I'm interested in is this little valley over here, waiting for service, because that's a really interesting valley. It turns out that in most retail experiences, it's miserable. The people who design the store never think about this experience. They have you wait in these long lines in these crowded places without thought as to how that was ever going to play out. They don't want to have dedicated space because the volume of people really is seasonal. So the problem is that they end up cramming you into various parts of the store, making it miserable not just for the people who are waiting in line, but for all the people who are trying to shop at the same time. It's not very thoughtful. It's not very intentional. Now, what could you do about this? Well, you could do what Apple did. You could employ appointments. Suddenly, instead of waiting in line, you now get to do something else, like go shopping in the store that sold you the defective product. And people do. Waiting in line is gone away. This is innovation. Now, I know innovation is a word that people use a lot. But innovation is really important. It's not about inventing something new. Apple did not invent the appointment. Appointments have been around for a really long time. Apple added value in a context where appointments hadn't been used before. It's about new value. That's what innovation really is. So let's map that journey again. Right? If we look at what it's like for the Apple Store customer, it's basically the same starting point. But we have this new step here. It says make appointment. Suddenly, for the Apple Store customer, that's a much more pleasant experience, creating a much more delightful path across the rest of it. By taking this thing that they didn't invent, but just applied in a context that nobody had ever done before, they created a much more delightful experience. They added value by creating delight. And this is designing an experience. There's a whole part of our community that insists that you cannot design experiences. I contend you can. You can measure them, you can map them, and you can design them. It's all about what we intend to do. Okay, that's Apple. What if we took some other context that's just a miserable experience? How could you possibly improve it? Let's say doing your taxes. Let's try this. It's an app that sucks the letters right off the page. No, it's an app that does something brilliantly simple, yet really clever. It takes a picture of the W-2 that your employer gives you, takes all the pertinent information, and if you really don't have much else to file but where you work, you can press one button and file your 1040EZ just with that information. For almost 2/3 of the American population, this app will do their taxes for them in about 45 seconds. So it's fascinating because they didn't invent OCR, they didn't invent scanning documents, they didn't invent scanning financial documents. They took something that somebody else did and they applied it to a new context and they created value. Or this. This is an MRI device. This particular MRI device, which is made by GE, happens to be primarily used in pediatric oncology. So you've got little children diagnosed with cancer coming in to lie down on this machine and see if the cancer is spreading, getting worse, or if the treatments are working. Multiple times throughout their treatment period, they have to sit in this thing. Now look at the device. It's in this horrible sterile room. It's this giant thing that towers over that 7-year-old. If you watch Japanese anime, there are things in their cartoons that look just like this that eat entire planets. Right? Of course you're going to be petrified by this device. And that's exactly what happens. As soon as the children see this thing, they grab onto their parents and they won't let go. They scream, they yell, they cry. They get so worked up that in order for them to actually get put into the scanner, the doctors are forced to sedate 80% of the kids who go into this machine. Now a designer, a single designer, at GE, the guy who designed that device, a guy named Doug Dietz, decided that this was just unacceptable. So he decided to do something about it. He put together a team, they worked for a while, and they came up with this. This is the GE Adventure Series. And what's fascinating about the GE Adventure Series is if we were to create that experience map for this, the experience doesn't start in this room. It actually starts down the hall in a room that's decorated like a sea shanty. And this particular machine, which is called Pirate Island, is in this pirate motif. So the kid, instead of being put into a lab coat, is put into a pirate outfit. As is the technician, as are the parents. And the child is invited to go on an adventure. You want to go on a pirate ship? Yes. Right? And then the child's brought into the hallway where the dock extends out into the hallway and carefully led along the dock, being told not to step off the dock because you don't want to fall in the water. So they lead in. And of course, the kid is looking back at their parents who are not paying attention, saying, "Dad, Mom, get on the dock." Right? And as soon as they come in the room, There's a mirror ball that's making it look like bubbles are floating in the air, and there's aromatherapy. This particular room smells like pina colada. To which the parents who come into the room almost always go, pina colada, I could use one of those. And then they laugh. And that's intentional, because Doug Dietz realized that if you can get to the parents, you can get to the kids. So if the parents are laughing, the kid will have more fun. So everything about the room is thoughtful. There are little Easter egg type graphics all over the room, and the kid is let to explore everything, every little corner, to find all the little cool images. And then the technician says, you want to know something? There are mermaids that will jump over the ship. Do you want to see them? Yes. Well, if you see them, what you have to do is we have to put you in the ship, and you have to lie down. You have to be absolutely still. If you're not still, the mermaids won't come. Can you be still? Yes. So they take the kid and they put them on the bed, and they go into the control room, and they talk through the radio system, and they say, okay, stay still, and the lights go down, and the bed slides into the scanner. And then the scanner mechanism starts up, and the mechanism has been created such that the LEDs that are on the rotating scanner that rotates at a fair clip in the darkness sort of look like mermaids flying through the air. Be absolutely still and the mermaids will come. They've managed to reduce the sedation rate from 80% down to 0.01%. Through design. Intentionally. This is experience design at its finest. Experience design is rendering intention in all the gaps, thinking about the entire experience. Now, it takes a remarkable organization to pull stuff like this off. But it turns out that business wants to do this. Industry by industry by industry, leaders are seeing, in fact, this is the way they have to go. So they have to learn how to put together teams that can make this happen. Now, nobody understands the value of the designer like Silicon Valley. Right now, if you are a UX designer, you are very much wanted by many of the organizations in this little strip of peninsula. And it turns out that people are paying incredible bounties to get good designers. Instagram, of course, was bought by Facebook for $1 billion. Sort of. Before you found out the actual value of their stock. But what was interesting about Instagram's purchase by Facebook was that at the time that they looked at purchasing Instagram, there were actually more than 30 different photo apps in the App Store, including Facebook's own photo app that they had just released 3 months before. So why would they pay $1 billion for a company when there's all these other companies they could have? Well, they wanted the designers. That's what they wanted. And so now we're seeing this happen and play out all over. Companies getting acquired, people paying huge bounties. Hot Studio just got sucked up by Facebook. I don't get it. I mean, I figure that in this particular plot, if you want to work for Facebook, you're working for Facebook. So acquiring a company and then getting the employees is like, they didn't want to work for Facebook. But that's what they're doing. And they're not the only ones. Google's doing the same thing. Twitter's doing the same thing. Yahoo's doing the same thing. All the big players are acquiring studios because they want the designers. They're killing products because they want the designers. And it's not just here in the Valley. Turns out that same desire for designers is happening at companies all over the country. Big name companies, leaders in their industries, are desperate to have the same designers that the Valley is trying to suck up. Right now, based on our research, we think there's more than 150,000 open design positions in the US. So, design is valuable. People want designers, they love designers. This is something that everybody is very happy to have. If you are not happy in your position, you're a designer, you can move on and get a great job someplace else. And suddenly business is looking at design and saying, do that designery thing for us because we need you to do that, right? This is a situation that's never happened before. We've never been in a position before where we were actually asked to do the things that we've been begging to be allowed to do for years. There's an old Chinese proverb that talks about this, which says, be careful what you ask for, lest it become so. Because it turns out, we don't really know what to do. This turns out to be really hard stuff, right? So, part of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years is around this problem. And we've been focusing our effort on the research of how designers get hired. We've been really interested in the hiring process and how people value designers and how they're looking at it. So we've been talking to all these different companies trying to understand what it takes to hire designers. And so we started with some simple questions like, what skills are found in the best design teams? We started to look and say, okay, if we look at the organizations that are very good at design and we compare them to the ones that struggle at getting good design, what do we see there? And we looked at tech companies and we looked at, Virgin America versus United, and we looked at Cirque du Soleil versus Ringling Brothers, and we looked at a variety of different companies in different industries that were succeeding because of their design over companies that were struggling. And we sort of came up with this active definition of what it means to do experience design. So there's a variety of things that go into this. For example, information architecture. Right? This idea that you have to take stuff and organize it in a way that people can find it. And the more complicated things get, the more you have to have that organization of the navigation, of the content, all of that stuff needs to be there. Or getting the copy out on the screen such that it actually explains and persuades and does all the important stuff. So copywriting turns out to be an important skill that you have to have in your experience design team. And you have to be able to try a design and see how it works and iterate and keep doing that. So this notion of iteration means that you have to have a management process that lets you do that. So you have to understand how to build design processes to do that. Of course, if you're going to iterate, that means you need a feedback mechanism. So you have to have research that will tell you how the design is doing. And designs today often involve moving parts, everything from the micro interactions that happen to the major parts of the flows and the thinking of how you move through the design problems. So that's interaction design. And a lot of the stuff we do is really complex, so you have a lot of information on the screen and you have to be able to deal with that, and we want to be able to interact with it to glean insights from all this data that we're sitting on top of. So information design is really key, which we don't want to confuse with just visual design, which, as I mentioned, people think of as this sort of aesthetic thing, but it's really not about aesthetics. It's really about communication, making sure that the most important information is communicated promptly, and stuff that is less important but probably necessary at some point whispers to the user at the right moment. And we have to be able to say no. We have to be able to say there's too much. We have to cut back. So that's this whole idea of editing and curation. And it turns out that as we sort of looked at the most successful teams, these were the skills that they had that were prominent, and these were the what we call the core skills of of experience design. And I would love, 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 love to be able to tell you that that's all there is. That if you just had that, you'd be great. But it turns out that those excellent organizations, the ones that were very good at putting out great experiences on a regular basis, they went further than this. They knew how to go into the field and talk to their customers and be able to interact with them in that way. They also understood their domains. If they worked in finance, they knew about financial systems. And if they worked in medicine, they understood medical systems. So they knew a lot about the domain that they were in and how that worked. And they also understood how they made money and how the business model works and how what they did contributed to that business model. So they understood all that. And of course, the data that is coming into organizations now is growing at an exponential rate. And so being able to glean insight from all that data turns out to be a key piece of that. And they have to be able to communicate the value of what we do. So when we're building features, when we're building capabilities, we have to communicate to the user why they should use it, why should it there. So understanding marketing is key. And of course, the technology that we're using is always getting more complicated, always going nuts, so we have to be able to deal with that. And of course, there's now this problem where all of this stuff is way more expensive than it used to be, so we have to communicate to the people who are going to fund us that there's a return on the investment that we have to provide. And everything we do is now social, and it's no longer us talking to a computer, but it's us talking to other people with this mediation between, so we have to understand how to do that. And of course, we have to communicate all this to the development team, and we have to have methods for communicating that. So we have to build use cases and other techniques for doing that. And that means we have to know what the developers are doing, and we have to understand the methods that they use. It turns out that these skills were all present in those successful teams. We made the mistake of continuing to ask. One of the questions we asked was, when you look at your team, think of the best designer you ever hired. What separated that person from the rest of the team? Now, what we expected to hear were things from that chart. We expected to hear, well, they understood how to do responsive design better than anybody else, or they knew Photoshop like you wouldn't believe, or they could go out and conduct user research in a way that no one else has ever done it. But that's not what they told us. They were very consistent in what they told us, but they didn't tell us that. What they told us was their best designer, what made them different than the rest, was that they knew how to explain to people through story what it was that we were trying to do. They knew how to explain to clients and stakeholders and developers what we were trying to do by using great storytelling techniques. And they told us that the best designers knew how to effectively critique their designs and their coworkers' designs. They knew how to receive critique, how to give critique in a constructive and affirmative way, and most important, how to bring people who'd never done critique, had only done criticism, never done critique, into the fold and get them to be productive and affirmative and constructive. They told us that the best designers could take an idea that they had in their head and render it in a way that everybody who looked at it said, oh, I know what you're trying to do. Whether it was a sketch on the back of a napkin or on a whiteboard or on a wireframe or in HTML, they could make it happen. And they told us that their best designers could, on a moment's notice, get up and take their ideas and present them to an audience of stakeholders, present them to a client, present them to end users, present them to developers, present them to their peers in a way that everybody would be riveted and get what they're trying to say. And they told us that the best designers could take a group of disparate folks and through clever facilitation get to the nuance and subtlety that was going to make that product or design great by facilitating a session of information gathering and collaboration. And that those soft skills it turned out, were just as important, if not more important, than all the other skills on the chart. So suddenly, it's really hard to be a UX designer. This is Dr. Stephen Margles. He is an orthopedic surgeon at the Leahy Clinic in Burlington, Massachusetts, about 10 miles to the northwest of Boston. He specializes in hands and wrists. If you are a concert pianist who has smashed their hand in a door, or a tennis player who has gotten repetitive strain injury, you'll make an appointment to see this guy. And he'll work his magic, and you'll be back in business, playing your music, playing your tennis. He's just amazing with hands and wrists. Anybody can go see him. You can make an appointment, but the wait is currently at about 6 months because the dude is up to his elbows in hands and wrists. Now, he works at the Leahy Clinic, where there are 34 orthopedic surgeons, each one specializing in some other body part, whether it be hips or feet or shoulders or spines. And this is a true definition of someone who specializes. That's who Dr. Margles is. But if you go 10 miles due west of the Leahy Clinic, you end up at Emerson Hospital in Concord, Massachusetts. And at Emerson Hospital, you will only find 8 orthopedic surgeons, none of whom specialize in any body parts, especially hands and wrists. So if you go in there with an orthopedic problem, you can see any of the 8 folks and they will treat you equally as well. But there is no specialization per se beyond orthopedic surgery, which is in itself a specialization. However, if you drive 175 miles to the northeast of Concord, Massachusetts, you will end up in Rumford, Maine. And at the Rumford Hospital, depending on which day you show up, you may or may not see their orthopedic surgeon because he's only there 2 days a week. You have a serious issue with your wrist, you may not get the orthopedic surgeon, you may get the general doctor who works in the trauma center there. That dude yesterday was delivering a baby, and tomorrow he's clearing an impacted bowel. Which, if you think about it, are similar. Don't think about it. And it's not that Rumford Hospital has no respect for specialists. It's that Rumford Hospital can't afford a specialist. And it's not that they can't afford a specialist because they don't charge enough money. They damn well charge enough money. The problem is there are just not enough hands and wrist cases in Rumford, Maine to keep a specialist in hands and wrists working. So instead, what has to happen is they just have a generalist. Now, let's go back to Dr. Margles, because it's really interesting how he became this dude who is specializing in hands and wrists. Because he started just as a plain old doctor. Every doctor starts as a plain old doctor. That's how you go to medical school. You go to medical school to become a doctor. And you have to learn everything about medicine. He has delivered babies. It was part of his rotation. In fact, to maintain his license, he has to continue to know how to deliver babies. He has done everything every other doctor has done. He just spends most of his time on hands and wrists. And that's what a specialist is. A specialist is a person who has expertise in one area above all the others. That doesn't mean they don't have expertise in other areas. It just means they don't know as much as they know in that one thing they specialize in. They can actually have a lot of expertise in all those other areas. A generalist is not someone who doesn't know how to do medicine. A generalist is someone who is equally knowledgeable in every area they practice in. You go into a field hospital in Nairobi, and you will find doctors who are just incredible at the range of things they can handle. They are no less capable than Dr. Margles. But what's interesting about them is that they don't specialize, because when you're in a field hospital in Nairobi, you can't afford to be a specialist. You have to handle everything that walks in the door. So it turns out the difference between specialists and generalists is not some sort of extra power, superpower. The difference between a specialist and a generalist is the economy that can support whether you're allowed to specialize in something or not. If the local economy can't support it, you cannot specialize. You can only generalize. Unfortunately for us, in the field of design, we actually have a third category. That third category we call compartmentalist. And a compartmentalist is someone who can only do one thing. They can only do user research, or they can only do visual design, or they can only do interaction design. And when faced with having to do one of the other things, they throw up their hands and say, "You don't want me, man. I'm no good at that. I'm no better than my mom." Right? That's a compartmentalist. And in our research, we learned that compartmentalist has another description. It's called a career-limiting decision. Because it turns out that being a compartmentalist means your days are numbered. In this world where design is highly valued, it's the generalist that is most highly valued. We can see it here in this little diagram that just comes off of the Mayo Health site. Because what's fascinating about this diagram is how it was created. Now, this is a diagram showing a brain aneurysm. If you've never encountered someone diagnosed with a brain aneurysm, you haven't experienced what is known to be just complete and utter sheer terror. Friend, family member just collapses on the floor in front of you. So, of course, you take them to the hospital. And trauma rooms in hospitals are normally very calm places because these people are used to everything. They see gunshot wounds. They see drug overdoses. They tend not to get shaken by too much. So they have this very even keel to them, and they just sort of move through their day. But as soon as a patient in their care is diagnosed with a brain aneurysm, they go into full-scale code blue something, and they just go nuts. And they go nuts because the average life span of someone who has been diagnosed with a brain aneurysm from the moment they are diagnosed is 32 minutes. They have 32 minutes to open up the cranial cavity and do surgery in order to relieve the blood pustule that has formed to kill the aneurysm before it explodes, causes a stroke, and kills the patient. And you get that from this diagram. I mean, just watching, just seeing what's happening here and seeing what's going on, this is not good. But what's interesting about this diagram is the person who created it, right? Because whoever created it, well, they've got really good visual design skills. They can draw. They can draw well. They know how to use color. They know how to proportion. They're very good at what they do. But they're not just your average graphic artist, right? Because this person also knows how to draw the human form. Anyone who's gone for an MFA or a BFA knows that they don't teach the human form for the first long period inside your curriculum, right? It's an advanced course. You have to draw fruit for months before they let you draw anything human because it's hard. And this person also understands anatomy. After all, look at the spinal cord and the jaw area and the cranial cavity. It's just incredible what they were able to do to represent what's going on in this person's body. So this is someone who's really good at anatomy, and that's an advanced skill. They don't even teach that in most art programs. And this person also knows something about medical science, because to understand how an aneurysm works requires that you have in-depth knowledge of all of those things. So this isn't for people where they take the diagram and they give it to the good drawing person who then gives it to the good human drawing person who then gives it to the good anatomy person who then gives it to the good medicine person. This is one person with all those skills. This is a generalist. And we need the same thing in our field. We need UX generalists. And UX generalists are these people who have all these different skills and they come together to be experience designers. And when we bring all those things together, it turns out we have another name for experience designer. We call it a unicorn. So the question then becomes, how do we make a unicorn? Well, my friend Adam Connor has one theory as to how to do this. It involves a horse and a narwhal. It's an approach. It could work. But it turns out that anyone can become a design unicorn. In fact, it only takes 5 easy steps. Here's how you do it. You pick some area that you're not that great at. Maybe it's visual design, maybe it's information architecture, maybe it's user research. And you go out and you learn everything there is to learn about that. And you know what? Today, more than anything, there's a million different resources for this. You can get fabulous books, you can find seminars like this, you can go to full-day workshops, you can do any number of things. And you just soak in as much as you can. And then you practice. You can try and practice at work, but since you're not good at it, they probably won't let you, so you got to practice on your own. But you practice. And by practice, I mean actually practice. I don't mean go off and do a side project. I mean practice, right? The best baseball players in the world spend hours every day in the batting cage hitting balls. These people get paid millions and millions of dollars a year, yet they still spend hours every day hitting balls. That's practice. They don't play fake games or scrimmages. They just hit balls for hours on end. What is the hitting ball equivalent of UX practice? We need to get that down and understand what that practice is. You have to practice your skills for hours, all the time, every chance you get. And then you start to deconstruct. You look at what other people are doing. You say, how would I do that? How would I replicate that? How would I build that? How would I copy that? And you learn how to do it yourself, just the way they did it, making the exact copy through imitation. Because it turns out that imitation is a fabulous way to learn to do something. And then you seek out feedback for the work that you do. You start to ask for it. And of course, you have to listen to it, which is actually the harder part, and not argue with it. And then the last step is you find someone else who also needs that skill, and you teach it to them. Because it turns out you learn a ton every time you teach something. So you want to teach them how to do what you just did. And that's it. Those are the 5 skills. And it turns out that the unicorn is our most important innovation. Because this is what's going to help us bring design to all these organizations. But there are 150,000 jobs out there. If we took everybody we knew who had skills in this field today, we would only get about 10 to 15% of that. So how do we create new designers, junior designers? Junior UX designers right now have a real problem. They are coming out of school, but they can't get jobs. And it's not because they're not valuable. They have a ton of value. The problem is they are not ready to be in the workplace. Part of it is that we've oversimplified what we were doing. We were trying to make everything so attainable that we've reduced it down to simple things. You can take an 8.5-hour course on user research and know everything there is to know about usability on Udemy, or a 2-hour session on user research and feedback at this thing, or a 2-day workshop. And that teaches you all you need to know. It doesn't work that way. Sure, you can learn skills, but you can't develop craftsmanship. the skill stuff is cheap, it's fast, we can do that. But craftsmanship, it takes time. It takes investment. And the deal is that in order to get skills, we can just focus on the surface. We can just look at these things and say, here's what you do, here's how you do the testing, here's how you do this. But it's not industrial grade stuff. Whereas the craftsmanship, in order to be a real craftsman at what you do, you have to have a real deep understanding. You have to have a lot of practice. And you have to have exposure to a lot of different techniques. So for the last 2 years, we've been sort of taking this idea and saying, how would we go about doing this? And we created something called the Unicorn Institute. The Unicorn Institute is an experiment. It's an experiment to answer the question, how would we train the next generation of UX designers? So we started by looking at what is happening in traditional design today. And what's happening in traditional design education today, we see some interesting patterns. So one of the patterns we see is that traditional design education focuses on creating the next Johnny Ive, the next Paul Lachaire. They are very much about creating these rock star designers that are going to shake the world up and be awesome. And that's great. There's a place for that. But not every designer needs to do that. So we decided to change our focus and say, well, what if we just focused on junior designers? Because frankly, we need hundreds of thousands of junior designers, or at least tens of thousands, to be able to meet the demand that's out there. People who will work for the next Paul Lachaire and the next Johnny Ive. So we need people to actually execute, to do those things. What we found when we looked at traditional education, we talked to the hiring managers, they said that the students that are coming to them are all really great thinkers. They're all big on thinking problems through. But it turns out that they're not that great at actually building and deploying, at making the things that are necessary. We need makers as much as we need thinkers. The hiring managers told us that the students that are coming out are all focused on doing individualized work. They're all used to working alone because that's how the schools grade their stuff. What they're not good at is collaborative work. And so what if we were to focus on collaborative work? The hiring managers railed against the type of projects that they see the students coming out with. The projects are all these greenfield projects where there are no constraints. And you see things come out of schools, these capstone projects. I've created an alarm clock for the homeless, right? It's sustainable. Great. But it has nothing to do with what folks are doing. So we decided, well, what would happen if we could create a curriculum that focused on real-world projects? And there's a lot of emphasis on technical skills, being able to use the tools that are there. And that's all important. But what if we also focused on those soft skills, the facilitating and the storytelling and critique? And we had that as part of what's going on. So we looked real close at how schools were structured, and we realized that the traditional design school sort of falls into this single semester pattern, where you have a semester where each course is a semester long, and you have 4 or 5 of these courses that are happening at the same time. And because a lot of design schools are now using projects, the way the projects work out is you have all these projects happening at the same time. And you have to do 5 projects at once, and they're all due on the same day because that's when the professors all have to have their grades in. And so you are in this situation where everything has to happen at once. And who's going to do quality work when they have 5 separate projects that they're working on at the same time? It's not going to happen. So we thought, okay, if we're going to do this, what would we do at the Unicorn Institute? So we sort of inverted it and put it on its head. And we said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have each course be 3 weeks long, but you only take one at a time. So not semester-long courses, just 3 weeks. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide those 3 weeks into a couple of pieces. The first is going to be a workshop. And instead of having a professor who has to know stuff based on things they've read and often are teaching out of the textbook a page or two ahead of the class, we're going to invite industry experts like, people like Luke Wroblewski and Ethan Marcotte and all these folks who give these great workshops that we have at our conferences and things. We're going to invite them to do a 2-day workshop of the same grade that they would give in an industry setting. And that'll be the first 2 days of the class. The next 3 days of the class would be an individual project, because what we heard from people who do group work is that you need to have individual mastery as part of what's going on. So there has to be an individual project just to prove mastery. And we would have full-time faculty who would design and oversee those projects. They wouldn't be the workshop leaders, but they would be people who were really on top of their game in the design space. And they would work with the students on those projects. Once the students proved that they had mastered whatever the skills were that were taught in the class, they would then return to their group projects, which would be the remaining 2 classes, integrating what they had just learned into their team project for the remaining 2 weeks. And the team projects would actually span multiple 3-week courses. So they would last from 3 to 5 months. So instead of having a little project in a long course, you have a long project for which there are small courses that continually happen. The idea being that hopefully at some point the students will take a course and they'll realize they have to redesign their project because everything they've learned since the beginning is completely wrong. And they just have to start over. And that's what we want. We may not let them, but we want them to feel that pain. Because that's how it works. And these projects, these won't be just sort of random projects that the students will make up, more sustainable alarm clocks for the homeless. We're not going to let them do that. Instead, the projects are going to come from 3 sources. We're going to work with foundations and philanthropies, we thought. We could work with these folks. We could have them produce grants. So they would then produce grants for community projects that have to happen. So imagine a women's shelter that needs an inventory system. Women's shelter keep clothing for the kids and the women who come into the shelter. They give it out all winter. They have clothing drives all summer. But their way they do inventory now is often just by opening the closet and seeing how much stuff they have left. And they end up shorthanded. So what if we were to do a predictive inventory system, something that could actually tell whether the shelter was going to run out of clothing for kids who are ages 6 to 8, and could actually give them enough notice to have a clothing drive, which takes about 6 weeks to spin up, to put that together and make that happen. So we would have them do that. And the way it would work is that the local philanthropy would award a grant to the shelter who applied for the grant. The grant would pay a little bit to make sure that the shelter faculty and staff are available for usability testing, for design critique, for all the things that have to happen. And then the money, the bulk of the money from the grant would actually go to a professional development team, which the students would work with directly in order to develop the actual code that the shelter would need. And the grade at the end of the project that the students would get would be based on a simple question. Did this application make life at the shelter better? That's what they would do. Another source would be the various hiring companies that we would work with all the way through the program. Hiring companies have all these projects. Like we were talking to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they have this database that's used to store every antiquity in their collection. Most people have new data inside their old databases. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they have a new database that has all their old data, 1,000-year-old data. And everybody in the museum has to use this thing. The curators use it, the exhibit designers use it, the insurance underwriters use it, everybody uses it, and everybody equally hates it because it was built by IT and no one gave it any thought. So they said this would be a perfect project for the students. The idea is to take a back-burnered project that isn't getting any love from the designers at the institution and give it to the students. And the deal would be, after the students come up with designs, if the institution is happy with it, they will commit the engineering and IT resources to get it built. So then the students get to work directly with their IT department and see what life is like working with a real museum ID department and all the personal hell that that involves. And of course, we would have school projects because we're going to need an attendance system and an admission system and all this stuff, and we're going to let the students work on that because, after all, it's free labor. But the deal is that 75% of what the students will do is project work. 2,400 hours worth throughout the 2 years of the program is what they would do. And so that 3 to 5 months of projects turns into 5 to 8 different projects that the students will graduate with, each being able to talk about the specific experiences they had and how they played a role on a team. Imagine having a conversation with a student who's just come out of school who can go into incredible depth about how hard it was to work with some other IT department and how they succeeded despite that and the hell they had to go through to get there. What kind of cleverness and smartness that would evolve from that you could see employing in your own organization. And what's cool about this is that what we came up with involves having a lot of teachers and mentors. There's a lot of folks involved. We have the industry experts who are coming in, our facilitators who are full-time staff. We've started nicknaming them unicorn wranglers. These guys they're at a ratio of 12 students to every facilitator. They basically are project leaders for the projects. They are also coaches. They are also helping design the curriculum. They're designing the personal mastery projects. So they're a really special, talented group of people who want to be involved with students but have design experience. And then the hiring companies are going to provide teaching assistants, which will be the people who will actually act as scouts to see if, in fact, they want to hire any of our students as they go through the program. And they'll work through that for 2 years, participating in the workshops and giving critique and helping work with the projects. And so we came up with this idea, and we thought, damn, this could work. And we realized, you know what? It is possible to do this. We could reinvent design education in a way. Now, this isn't the only way we'll have design education. We'll still have the traditional schools, which will still produce great students doing great things. But we need to create 150,000 people or something of that ilk. It's only going to get worse as time goes on, so we need to figure out a way to actually produce these folks. This could help. This could work. So it turns out that we have learned that places have rules. In the state of Tennessee has a rule that you're not allowed to tell anyone you're starting a school until you've been authorized by the state of Tennessee. So I can't tell you that we're starting a school in Tennessee. Maybe. But you didn't hear from me. But I've been spending a lot of time in Tennessee. And it's very exciting. But that's what I came to talk to you about today. It's really a great time to be an experienced designer. And it all comes back to this idea that design is really about rendering intent. And it's that intent that we've been crafting as our core competency that really sort of is driving what we're doing. And we can look at the entire experience and fill in the gaps. That's what experience design is about. We have to understand that teams right now need generalists way more than they need specialists. So we have to bring up our own skills and give that a whirl. At the same time that we want to make sure that we are looking at crafting organizations that are capable of handling any problem that's thrown at them. And that unicorns exist. You can become one, and we can train them. And that's really exciting. If you want to find out more about what we're doing with the Unicorn Institute, we have a website, unicorninstitute.com. And you can follow us on the Twitters, which apparently doesn't allow us to have an E. I guess it's a Silicon Valley thing. And if you're interested in the work that I'm doing, you can follow me on the Twitters, which you can learn about design stuff and UX stuff and everything you want to know about United's customer service. Also, you can contact me on LinkedIn, and we have a ton of articles and stuff on UIE.com. And that's what I came to talk to you about. So thank you.
So, Jared, while we're waiting, very good. While we're waiting, I just had one question for you because I think you are renowned in the community for doing in-career training. And I was just kind of surprised that what you presented was something that's really, jump off the track, presumably accumulate student debt, and whatever the morals are of that kind of fiefdom that you enslave yourself to, there's also the question about, won't most people learn on the job? And how, given your great experience teaching people who are in career, acquiring skills and then using them, why wouldn't that be the dominant mode to get 150,000 more people involved?
I think it can't be the dominant mode for a couple reasons. One is the hiring managers don't want people who need to learn on the job. They want people who know how to do stuff. And they don't want to pay for people in their organizations to have to learn everything. They don't mind paying a little bit, and I've made a living off of that, so that's okay. But it's very clear that a company like Marriott cannot afford to train everybody at Marriott on design. They need people coming in who understand design. It's very simple. Would you rather go to a doctor who's learning on the job or one who went to medical school? And it wasn't that long ago where learning on the job was how doctors learned how to do doctoring, because schools didn't exist until the last couple of hundred years. So for most of humanity, medicine was done that way. But I'm not sure anybody's suggesting we go back there, even with all the things that are wrong with medicine and the insurance industry and all that. I don't think that's the place we want to go back to. So I think the fact is that design is a core skill. Everybody needs to understand design. I think we start at this sort of higher ed level, but eventually we have to move it into lower ranking education. There's no reason why we're not teaching design to kids when they're in elementary school and high school, because it's
in Oakland, Susie Weiss at the D school is doing.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting stuff that's happening there, but it's very focused in very small populations. So,
you two can talk.
There you go. Start with Hunter.
Curious, I saw something in 60 Minutes with David Kelly. As an interview, he was talking about the Stanford D School and design thinking, and I don't know if there's anything. I just formulated a question because no one else was really asking, but about the school at Stanford and about design thinking in general.
I would love to try and understand what design thinking is. I've been working on this for a while. As far as I can tell, design thinking is a sort of post hoc analysis tool. It's Monday morning quarterbacking. It's basically, if somebody came out with something great, it's like, oh, they were obviously doing great design thinking. And if they come out with something poor, it's like, oh my God, there's no design thinking happening here. And I don't know what design thinking is. I cannot. If someone could explain to me how in the field I identify design thinking, then I can go back to my data and I can find the organizations that are doing well and the organizations that are doing poorly, see which ones of those are actually doing design thinking, and then correlate it. But I can't for the life of me figure out what the hell this thing is.
Well, in this interview, they actually said, like Steve Jobs said, you can do your D school, but I still want some of the core skill, like engineering or computer science or whatever. And so even there was like, this is nice to have as a sort of icing on the cake.
Yeah, it's I don't know what it is. It's like, be smart. Don't do stupid things, right? These are great platitudes, but I don't think you form a career. I'm a design thinker. What the hell does that mean? Right? At least when I go to Apple, I know what a genius is. They're the guys who can fix my Mac.
Yeah, I don't think that 60 Minutes piece did a service to.
No, I don't think anything's done a service to design thinking. It's serviceless. Yes.
So I actually had a similar question. my understanding of the design thinking programs that are preached through the IDEO D-School people, through these executive programs and whatnot, is that they take people who are domain experts, who are MBA types, who are doctors, who are engineers, and they teach them first empathy, methods of sort of going out to people, let's say diabetes patients, if that's who you're trying to make a device for, spending some days there, then doing these brainstorming with their brainstorming rules that are open and then studio critique and a lot of prototyping and a lot of feedback on the prototyping. And what they get at the end of those executive programs are people who have job titles like MBA, business person, business analyst, doctor, mechanical engineer, who have empathy, who have ways of rendering intent. And so I'm wondering what you think of this sort of, in one future you have people in all job titles who have taken the philosophy of design about intent and brought that into their own job titles, versus a proliferation of people with a design job title who are making business decisions, who are redesigning MRIs and things like that.
Yeah, okay. So first, I can't remember what life was like as a UX professional before we got empathy, because I mean, empathy seems new. We didn't have it a few years ago, but now we have it, and I'm very excited we have it. So it's nice that we got it, and it seems like, you know, it's I don't know. It's nice to have the label. Again, I go into organizations, I watch them do their work. I cannot tell you on a chart of their site, you know, their workflow, at what point empathy was applied. It's again one of these crazy ass labels that is just like, well, we have to apply empathy to this project. Oh, that's a brilliant idea, right? I don't know what that means. But here's what I know. Doug Dietz went through the D School. It was because of his experience at the D School that he came up with the Adventure series for the MRI device. I don't know about you, but that's really great design. That's my opinion. And could he have done all that without ever learning the label design thinking? Yeah, because that's what we've been doing. Some of us have been doing it for 30 plus years. So I think that I'm a software engineer. I didn't start as a UX professional. In fact, I still don't consider myself a UX professional. I consider myself a guy who goes off and researches stuff and asks questions and does experiments. And you know, this whole UX profession has been built around things I did. It's like discovering that a house was built around you while you were busy doing your stuff. It's just there. But the thing is that I think that the UX profession will disappear if we do our job well. Because if we do our job well, every doctor and accountant and lawyer will understand what experience is and not insist that we lie about reading the terms and conditions, knowing full well that no one's read them, but instead create a better experience about terms and conditions. Much like the lawyer who works for MailChimp did when they redesigned the total experience of their privacy and terms and conditions thing so that people don't have to lie about it anymore. And made it readable and easy to use and easy to understand and actually very useful. And they engaged in design. And I think that yeah, if we do our job well, we need to have everybody thinking about design. And that's fine. Everybody thinks about math, but we're not all mathematicians. So that doesn't mean we're going to get rid of designers.
Thanks, Jared. I think, should we have one more question?
We have a question
Go
here,
ahead.
yes?
Do we have one more? Go ahead.
So first, thank you very much for this great presentation. So you mentioned in the slides that you think like presenting and storytelling are the two of those very important skills.
Yeah, I lean towards those.
Yeah, and then I realized, oh, this is a very great presentation. And it's like you did very good job in storytelling and in presenting your ideas and communicate with the audience.
Thank you. I was shooting for that.
So I was wondering, could you actually share your personal stories about like how do you came up with this presentation? Like for example, why do you decide to begin with the fake Apple stores and mentioning several times later when you talk about different like points or like?
So storytelling has a structure to it. It's like any other type of design experience. There's a structure to an arc. There's a fabulous book called Save the Cat that is a film craft book. It was Kathy Sierra told me I should read it one day, and it's brilliant. The title actually, it's about writing film, and the title is all about the fact that if you have your hero save a cat from a tree in the first few seconds of the film, you damn well better come back to that somewhere else in the film, otherwise you need to cut it. And it's about the nature of a story arc and how everything has to be very intentionally thought through. And design of a story, a presentation, is very much the same way. Even the positions and the pauses and the work on this. This presentation I've been working on for 2 years. So it's something, and you know, I talk about practice and this idea of practice. I practice presentations frequently. And I have all sorts of techniques for practicing my presentation telling skills and my presentation creation skills. And those are separate skills, by the way, and we do ourselves a disservice by not acknowledging that. We make people go off and create their own presentations and give them, and they don't know how to do either, and then they do crappy presentations. Then we say, oh, you should, don't present, stop presenting. And that's bad, that we shouldn't do that. So I think that presentation skills, story crafting skills are absolutely key. Whitney Quisenberry wrote a fabulous book on storytelling with a co-author whose name is escaping me right. Kevin Brooks, thank you. My name server had crashed, so I couldn't tell you that without help. Fortunately, we have a distributed name server system here in the room and invented right here at Park. And so I was able to resolve that. But the key to this is that it takes a lot of work to do a presentation, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Great. So much.
Thank you very much for encouraging my behavior.